The .NET world was rocked by a controversy recently, and I want to talk about it. The basic summary is that a tool called Hot Reload was a major feature of .NET 6. Recently, the command line version of Hot Reload was removed from .NET 6, and this caused quite a bit of frustration because it meant that this touted new feature would only be available in Visual Studio 2022. Tools like VSCode, Writer, and others that rely on the command line tooling would not be afforded the same feature as the full version of Visual Studio. Now, before we get into what happened, why it's a big deal, what this means, I do want to point out that I purposefully held off on doing this video until Microsoft could respond to the community. They did that recently by announcing that they're restoring the command line version of Hot Reload to .NET. So while some of this might sound like a non-issue to some people, to others it sounds like the end of the world for .NET. In my opinion, it's somewhere in the middle. Neither extreme is really correct in my opinion. So let's start with what's been happening, and then I'll talk through my thoughts on the situation and what lessons we can take away from it. So let's start by walking through the timeline here. Back on May 25th of 2021, Dimitri, one of the PMs on the team, announced this new tool called .NET Hot Reload. The idea here is that you're running an application. It does not have to be a web application. It can be a desktop application as well. When you make a change in the code, the running application gets updated. You can see it in real time. And not only that, it saves your state. So if you were halfway through filling out a form and you make a modification to one of the text fields, everything is still retained on that form and the text field just changes based upon the code you put in. Really cool feature. I will be having a couple of videos on it on my channel covering all the cool stuff that Hot Reload can do. In fact, there is a 10-minute training video coming up soon on Hot Reload specifically. I encourage you to check it out. So Hot Reload is a really great tool, and this was shown off both as a part of Visual Studio 2019 through a preview, as well as through .NET Watch, the command line tooling in .NET 6. That's important, okay? So this is shown off in two different ways, one built into Visual Studio and one with the command line. Now, if you're not familiar, the command line for .NET is really powerful. In fact, you can do all the work you want for C#, building a project, compiling a project, running a project, debugging a project, and even publishing a project all through the command line. Why is that important? Well, because you can use tools like VS Code, not just Visual Studio, to build your application. So you can have the same experience on a Mac as you would on Windows or Linux if using VS Code. So that's a big deal. And this is a great new feature that was promoted way back in May. Since then, it has only gotten better. They've improved it. They've made some changes to it that make it even more powerful. And throughout the summer and throughout the early fall, there has been people working in this. Now, when the release candidate 1 for .NET 6 came out, this feature was in that. Okay, and that's important because a release candidate, in theory, is supposed to be the idea that they're just making tweaks. In fact, they say this is a go live version, meaning you can go live with .NET 6 even at this point before it's released. You can go live and they will support it. And the only changes coming up to .NET should be tweaks, improvements, and fixes, not new features or, keyword here, removing features. So that's where we were at recently. Then this came out 3 days ago. Now, this was Thursday. This came out it's a pull request on the .NET SDK to remove Hot Reload support for .NET Watch. What this does is it removes the command line Hot Reload support in .NET. All right. Now, to make matters a little worse, not only was it removed, but and I'm not logged in here so you can't see this, but it was almost immediately locked so that the community could not give feedback on this particular pull request. So this was done, and then it was locked so that the community could not have a voice on this specific pull request. Now, a blog post came out from Dimitri on October 20th saying, hey, here's what's happening. And it was basically a progress report on Hot Reload. And it talked about all the new stuff in Hot Reload, how it works, and so on. But then if you scroll way down to the bottom here, you will find update on Hot Reload support through .NET Watch. Now, the original text was this, where they said, hey, you know what? They are kind of pulling back support on the .NET Watch and are going to focus on Visual Studio 2022. And then later, they're thinking about adding Hot Reload to Visual Studio for Mac in a future release. Now, there was some clarification later. To clarify, we're not releasing Hot Reload as a feature of the .NET Watch tool. We're investing all our energy into Visual Studio 2022 and working to support Hot Reload in Visual Studio for Mac in a future release. Essentially, what they're saying is, hey, the .NET Watch tool, that's going away. The ability to, from the command line, have Hot Reload, that's going away, and we're going to focus on Visual Studio 2022 and later on Visual Studio for Mac. Now, there's two ways to look at this. And this is where a little bit of additional heat came in that maybe wasn't fully warranted, but maybe was based upon future conversations. But the thought is here, what they're communicating is, hey, we only have so many engineering hours, and we need to make sure we provide a great product and one that is bug-free. So we're going to focus on one thing at a time. The first thing will be our flagship product, Visual Studio 2022. We're going to focus on that first and make sure that Hot Reload is perfect for that. Then we'll expand out to VS for Mac, and that was it, okay? So the one way to read this is, hey, we just have a limited amount of time. We don't want to put out half-baked products, which is totally understandable. That's the reason why .NET MAUI is not being released with .NET 6. It was pushed off until Q2 of 2022 because of the fact that there's only so many engineering hours in the day, and in order to get things right, they have to move the deadline. This happens in every project. I'm amazed at how much the .NET team gets into any release. That's the charitable way to look at this. The less than charitable, but probably a little more accurate way to look at this is that they had a working Hot Reload for the command line, and they removed it. It's not they had a half-working one, they had a working one that they then removed. Which means it's more about the fact that they removed it in favor of Visual Studio 2022. Why is that important? Well, Visual Studio 2022 is not free. Now, if you are an independent developer, if you are working open source, if your company has 5 or less developers and makes less than $1 million a year, then it is free. You can get Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition for free, and yes, that has Hot Reload. So don't worry, you're not going to have to pay for it most likely, unless, again, you're working for a company that, quite frankly, can afford it. And at that point, yes, you're going to pay for your software. That makes sense. But that they pulled that tool back because it was a great feature, and it looks to be a decision about selling more copies of Visual Studio 2022, making it more important. Okay, that's what it looks like. So that was the feedback that the community got on Hot Reload and on this pull request to remove support from .NET Watch. Now, pretty soon thereafter, there was a new pull request made by a community member who said, hey, let's revert this, remove the Hot Reload support from .NET Watch. Basically put that back in and just reverts that pull request. This got a lot of traction. Notice on the right-hand side here are reviewers. If we start scrolling and 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 scrolling, these are the people that reviewed this and said, yes, let's do this. And in fact, there's 503 participants. There's a screenshot with all of the different faces. If you notice right there, there's me. Because this is a big deal. Now, the cool thing here, and this is important, and I don't want you to miss this inside of this whole thing. The cool thing is the community has a voice. Maybe Microsoft won't listen to it all the time, but the community has a voice. And this is the community's voice. This is open source development. This is the ability to say, hey, I want to see this different. And 502 of your closest friends show up to back you and say, yep, that's what we want to see. So this pull request came through. Now, after that, there's a lot of talk on blog posts. There's a lot of talk on Twitter. There was a lot of talk in kind of closed door sessions. The MVPs have a private mailing list, and that was blowing up. There was a lot of different channels of communication where people were saying, hey, this isn't okay. And then this article dropped on The Verge. And The Verge says, hey, Microsoft just angered the .NET open source community with a controversial decision, and Microsoft risks burning all of its goodwill in this move. And so it talks through this move. It points out Dimitri's statement. By the way, Dimitri is not at fault here. Don't start go yelling at Dimitri. We'll talk about that in a minute. But right down here, it says The Verge understands that the decision to remove the functionality from .NET 6 was made by this person, the head of Microsoft's developer division. Sources describe the move as a business-led decision, basically saying, hey, Visual Studio 2022 needs to be the flagship, needs to be promoted, needs to be exclusive in some way. Hot Reload seems to be that way. That's what we want to do. So this article right here, and then it brings up the fact that, hey, this comes weeks after unrest over the .NET Foundation. I did a video on that and what all went into that decision that ultimately led to Claire resigning. And by the way, that has turned out really well. The board is listening. There is a session coming up soon where the board will talk to people directly, and they have reverted those changes, just so you know. But this comes on the heels of that issue, which again, the .NET Foundation isn't supposed to be Microsoft at all. It's supposed to be independent. That's in their charter, but at the same time, it kind of is. We talked about that. So this is a second big .NET controversy in just a few weeks. So this is a bad look for Microsoft. And then there was blog posts similar to this one. Can we trust Microsoft with open source? Great question. And it goes through, I think it's this article especially, and I'll link all these articles down below, but I think this article did a good job of really bringing out the issues, bringing out what was going on, really who's at fault, and it did raise some great questions. Now, with this article, just like with The Verge and with every tweet you see and every blog post you read, you do need to look at, hey, is that an opinion or is that a fact? I think there's a few opinions in here versus facts, but at the same time, there's a lot of facts in here. There's a lot of things have been backed up. So it's not like it's just one big opinion piece. There's a lot of stuff in here, but just always, when this is a general piece of advice, whenever you're reading anything, just make sure that you do some fact checking yourself. So this article here kind of points out some really good things, and it talks about undermining their own commercial offerings. Microsoft, but asterisk, does not want features like Hot Reload to make it into the SDK. That's an opinion, but notice the asterisk here, Microsoft outside the .NET team, okay? Because there is a very big distinction here, and it's a good one, that the .NET team is not who's to blame here. So be careful when you talk about this that you don't start blaming the wrong people and actually hurt the people who are trying to help us, okay? So, but articles like this came out saying, hey, can we really trust Microsoft? And it really brought up a lot of those hard feelings that we've had over the years when Microsoft was closed sourced, when they did try and squash the competition and so on. this wasn't a good look. Now, I will say that since then, and this is what I was waiting for when I created this video, Scott Hunter, who is over this area, posted a blog post that said, hey, we're going to support the command line. We've actually brought that pull request back in. He merged it back in. Notice the this revert pull request has been merged, which means they said, yep, we're going to take that. We're going to, basically roll back this removal of .NET Watch, or the hot reload from .NET Watch. And he talks about the reasoning for it. With the runway getting short for .NET and Visual Studio, we chose to focus on bringing hot reload to Visual Studio 2022 first. This is where, and this is in my opinion, this is not necessarily fact, okay? Again, I want to be clear on that. But this does seem to be an excuse, okay? This does look to be an excuse. I'm not sure if it is or not. Because again, it does make sense that you have to focus your time on what you can do, and with engineering hours not being infinite, you have to cut things. Again, that's why .NET MAUI is not in .NET 6. But hot reload was working, so unless there is a list of issues that were breaking changes, that does seem to fall a little short of the truth, okay? Also, the fact that they could have released this with a preview sticker on it, where it says, hey, the .NET Watch on the command line, it's not fully baked yet. Maybe there's some problems or bugs. We know that, and it is what it is, okay? They didn't do that. So it does ring a little hollow here, but he does say that we're listening to customers' feedback to deliver on our needs. Thank you for making your feedback heard, and so on. So this has been rolled back. So .NET Watch, the hot reload, the command line interface for that does work. It will work for VS Code, and so on. So that's what has happened. Let's talk about what my thoughts are in this situation. And before we go any further, I do want to say a couple of things. First of all, and I've already said it once, but I want to say it again, don't blame the .NET team. They really hated this decision too. This caused their life to be miserable. Today is Saturday night. This decision was just pushed out a little while ago. That means they're working on a Saturday to get this right. So they are not the ones to blame here. I do not think for a minute that they're the ones that said, hey, we need to pull this. All right. It does appear to be a business decision. And either way, whether it's a business decision or it was a manpower or person power, if you want, but a decision about how much engineering time we have, even if it was that, which one to pull, probably the wrong choice. But the developers who are working on this said, hey, we're trying to work internally. Now, they did not say things publicly, and that's probably a good thing, because you don't want to bash your boss on social media. Really not a good look. Not a good way to make that next performance review go swimmingly. Okay, so they didn't do that, and they didn't come out and say, we hate this too. Not a great look. But instead, they did work internally, and they did communicate indirectly, hey, we're hurting about this. We don't like this. We're working on this, and so on. So don't blame the .NET team. Remember that the .NET team are people. Microsoft's a corporation. Microsoft has, lots of people involved in decision making, but the actual people working on the project are real people who really have an investment in .NET and in open source. So they're going to lean towards open source. They're going to lean towards making .NET great, not in reducing .NET to a more of a cash cow. Okay, so don't blame the .NET team. And number two, anger and hyperbole isn't helping anyone. Okay, so when these situations come up, just going, embrace, extinguish, and all the rest, battle Microsoft or $, not really helping anything. Okay, try to communicate more clearly what the problems are rather than just being angry. because your anger doesn't really help the situation. It often clouds the situation and makes it more about you and your anger than it is about the situation and making it better. Okay, so those are my thoughts first of all, but let's talk about this situation. First of all, this was a bad call. Okay, pulling out the hot reload from the command line is not a good look. It looks like big bad Microsoft, whether it was or it wasn't. It looks that way, and that's not a good thing. Again, this could have been simple prioritization, but it looks more like at least short-term thinking or a focus on, the Visual Studio above all others. And to be honest, let's pause there for a minute and think about that. If you were making a paid product, would you want to build something that part of that paid product was free, and that free part could be used to get around your paid product and let somebody else get paid for their product instead using your free stuff? I understand why you wouldn't want to do that. I understand why you'd say that doesn't make sense. And quite frankly, if they had said, we're going to prioritize hot reload first in Visual Studio 2022, and then in Mac, and then the command line, that would have been pretty okay. Okay. Now, I would prefer they didn't do that. I prefer they prioritize the command line first because of the fact you can run automation against it, because of the fact that you can support VS Code, because of the fact that this is more about a community than it is about just the paid product. But if they had said, we're going to start with VS 2022 first, that would have been okay. But they didn't. They said, we're going to start with Visual Studio and the command line. And they were both equal. And they talked about both and about how both can be valuable. So that's where the problem was. It wasn't in the fact that they would prioritize their paid product. I think their paid product should be a priority because it's, again, how else are they going to make money on C#? Okay, you think about it. You can pretty much be a full-time C# developer with a full-time income. You could make $500,000 a year as a C# developer building C# applications and not pay a dime to Microsoft. Doesn't seem like a great model, okay? So the fact that they do this for the community is huge. It's very, very helpful, and it's not something I think we should take for granted. But it is something where now that you do it, don't show something, show you have it, and then take it away and say, well, we're not going to give that to you because you don't pay for that. Not a good look, okay? So the bottom line here, we don't know for sure why this call was made. Scott said, here's the reason why. I'm not convinced of that reason, but at the same time, I'm not going to attack Scott for that because the fact that, you know what, Scott has a boss too, and that person has a boss too, and so on. And this could be a business decision. It could be a short-sighted business decision by a person who didn't really understand. And if you were looking at it from the outside perspective, being able to make more money on something makes sense. Okay, so not a great call. It's a bad call. It looks bad for Microsoft, but I think this was more a short-sighted thing rather than a full-on malicious. Now, this has hurt the trust of the community again. Okay, so we just talked about the .NET framework, .NET Foundation, and the mess that's there. And really part of that is Microsoft being involved in that pretty tightly. And the fact that it says it's independent, but it's not really. And the part that wasn't independent was the part that was causing problems, and that wasn't good. And then right on the heels of that is this move that, again, removes some trust from the community. Trust is really hard to build. It takes a long time, but you can lose it so very fast. So this is an unfortunate situation. Now, there is a bright spot here. Okay, so I do not want you to think this is all doom and gloom. In fact, I am very encouraged by the situation, and here's why. Point number 3 here on my thoughts. The community has a voice. We saw 500 and whatever it was, people came together and said, this isn't okay, this is what we want. Twitter lit up. .NET was trending on Twitter, not for a great reason, but it was because the community said, this isn't okay. Okay, so the community has a voice in .NET. But even more importantly, my fourth point here is that Microsoft listened to the community and changed quickly. This is a big deal. Microsoft is a massive company that is focused on making money, and they should be. They're a business, okay? Their job is to make money, and they do, and do well, but they also listen to their community. They listened to what we had to say, and they made a change, and they did so on the weekend after just a couple of days. So that's a huge deal. So when we talk about, where is .NET? Is .NET okay? Should I be concerned about being a .NET developer? I think now is a great time to be a .NET developer, because not only do we have the backing of a massive corporation, not only do we have the support to have free versions of Visual Studio and to have some great changes coming forward and so on, we also have a company that is listening to the community and changing because of it, growing because of it. Yes, they made a mistake. And no, I don't think we should just brush that off and say, oh, well. I think we should be wary. I think we should be watching to make sure that they continue to build back that trust. But at the same time, we also have something really good. And this is something I do not want to just throw out because the fact that something bad happened, okay? Because everyone makes mistakes. And whether this was intentional or not, we need to be able to allow them to grow, allow them to change, allow them to become better. Because that's what we want for ourselves, okay? So where do we go from here? Number one, .NET is solid. This should not shake your faith in it or the ecosystem. Don't worry, this is a good thing. Number two, the new updates to .NET are awesome. Check them out. In fact, if you've not seen it already, I have a whole series on right now called 10-minute training, where I dive into little features in .NET 6 and C# 10 and so on that are coming out. I got a lot of those coming out because of the fact there's so much stuff that needs to be covered. I'm also covering on Mondays. I'm covering in my full videos, new .NET stuff that's coming out because there's so much awesome stuff coming out. I don't want this to overshadow the really cool stuff because we haven't lost anything. We've actually gained something, and we're getting a ton more soon. So number three, and this is an encouragement to the entire community, including myself, but let's let go of the frustration. Yes, this was a frustrating situation. Yes, it could have been done better. Yes, Microsoft messed up. And yes, it wasn't a good look. But just being frustrated and angry doesn't really help anybody. In fact, it hurts you, okay? It hurts your ability to move forward, your ability to grow beyond it, your Microsoft ability to grow beyond it. If we just always remember all the bad stuff that they've done, then we really sell them short because there's a lot of stuff they did right as well. So let's let this frustration go. Let's move beyond it because of the fact that we are beyond it now. We have a resolution here. And finally, let's go build some awesome things. .NET 6 is an amazing, mature platform. If you haven't used it already, I can't wait for you to use it. It's amazing. Visual Studio 2022, it's awesome. It's fast. It's 64-bit for the first time ever. Lots of cool stuff coming out in the first part of November. November 9th, I believe, 8th and 9th, something like that. The new .NET 6 and Visual Studio 2022 and all the rest of the stuff is coming out. There's even a new version of Visual Studio for Mac. Preview 2, I believe, is out currently. Lots of cool stuff. Check them out. The community is growing. The community has a voice. Microsoft listens to that community, and we are getting awesome new stuff. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.